It was a typical Tuesday morning when I first felt it, the unbearable weight of monotony. Eric sat across from me at the breakfast table, scrolling through his emails while sipping his black coffee. He looked as he always did, sharp, polished, and quietly confident. Yet, as I watched him, a hollow ache settled in my chest. It wasn't that he had changed. If anything, his consistency had been my anchor for years. But somewhere along the way, it had become a chain. "Big day ahead?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Always," he replied, glancing up briefly. His green eyes met mine for a fleeting second before returning to his screen. "What about you?" "Just the usual," I said, but the words felt heavier than they should have. The usual. That was our life: morning coffee, work, dinner, Netflix, sleep. Repeat. In the beginning, I had loved Eric's steadiness. He was the kind of man who made you feel safe just by being in the same room. While I had always been the dreamer, chasing ambitions and adventures, he had been my rock, grounding me when I drifted too far. But as the years passed, his reliability began to feel like stagnation. And that's when Daniel walked into my life. It started innocently enough. Daniel joined our marketing firm as a consultant for a major project, and from the moment we met, there was an undeniable chemistry. He was everything Eric wasn't: spontaneous, fiery, unpredictable. While Eric measured his words carefully, Daniel spoke with reckless abandon, his energy lighting up every room he entered. Our first real conversation happened during a late night at the office. The rest of the team had gone home, but Daniel and I stayed behind, poring over presentations. At some point, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're brilliant, you know that?" he said, his voice low and warm. I laughed nervously. "It's just a pitch, nothing groundbreaking." "No, it's more than that," he insisted, leaning forward. "You have a way of making people see things differently. That's rare." I felt my cheeks flush under his gaze. It had been years since anyone looked at me like that, like I was more than just a wife, more than a cog in the wheel of corporate life. The conversations continued. Late nights turned into shared dinners, then drinks. Each interaction felt like stepping closer to a line I knew I shouldn't cross. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. Daniel made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. One night, as we sat on the rooftop of our office building, the city lights stretching out below us, he turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about what it would be like if we weren't just coworkers?" My breath caught. I should have walked away. I should have told him it was inappropriate. But instead, I leaned in. The first time Daniel kissed me, it was like electricity coursing through my veins. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Every moment with him felt like a secret world where I could shed the weight of my responsibilities and just be. We became reckless. Stolen weekends, whispered phone calls, and hurried texts. I told myself I deserved this, a slice of passion in a life that had become so painfully dull. But the guilt was always there, a shadow that followed me everywhere. Eric trusted me implicitly, and that trust was a weight I carried every time I looked into his eyes. He would ask about my day, kiss me goodnight, and make plans for the future as if everything was perfectly fine. And for a while I convinced myself it was. Until the day he found out. Eric discovered the affair by accident. I had left my phone on the kitchen counter, and a message from Daniel lit up the screen. I walked into the room just as Eric picked it up, his brow furrowing as he read the words. "Who's Daniel?" he asked, his voice calm but cold. My stomach dropped. "Eric, I can explain," but my face showed it all. "Don't," he interrupted, his green eyes piercing mine. "Just tell me the truth. How long has this been going on?" I felt the air leave my lungs as I stammered, "A few months." He didn't yell. He didn't throw accusations. He simply nodded, his expression a mixture of heartbreak and quiet resignation. "Why didn't you just tell me you were unhappy?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "You could have tried," he said softly, then looked down at the phone still in his hand. He set it on the counter carefully, as though even that small gesture required effort. I gave you everything I thought you needed, Cassie. His voice faltered, and he turned away, running a hand through his hair. I'm not going to fight you over this. If you want him, if you think he makes you happier, then I'll step aside. His words broke something inside me. The pain in his voice wasn't anger or bitterness, but something far worse: acceptance. He wasn't trying to hurt me, wasn't throwing the betrayal back in my face. Instead, he was gracious, even in his heartbreak, and that made it all the harder to bear. Eric, I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't. I trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you apologize for tearing apart the life you built together? I don't think I can hear this right now, he said quietly. I'll pack some things and go stay with a friend. You can have the house for now. We'll figure out the rest later. You don't have to leave, I said, my voice breaking. He shook his head, giving me a small, sad smile. Yes, I do. Take care of yourself, Cassie. With that, he turned and walked upstairs. I heard the sound of drawers opening and closing, the soft rustle of fabric as he packed a bag. When he came back down, he didn't look at me. He simply grabbed his keys, paused in the doorway for a moment, and then he was gone. I stood there in the silence, staring at the door he had just walked through, and felt the full weight of what I had done. Eric hadn't screamed, hadn't thrown anything, hadn't even told me he hated me. Instead, he'd left with grace and dignity, leaving me alone with the shattered pieces of our marriage. And that somehow made it so much worse. With Eric gone, I thought I would finally feel free. But freedom wasn't what I found. Living with Daniel was thrilling at first. No more sneaking around, no more lies. We went on spontaneous trips, stayed up all night talking, and indulged in the kind of passion I had dreamed about. But dreams have a way of fading when reality sets in. Daniel's carefree nature, the thing I had found so attractive, began to reveal itself as something else entirely. He struggled to hold down a job, spending most days on the couch scrolling through his phone. Bills piled up, dishes went unwashed, and the spark that had once drawn us together started to dim. One evening, after another exhausting day at work, I came home to chaos. Empty takeout containers covered the coffee table, dirty clothes were strewn across the living room, and the trash bin was so full it had started to spill onto the floor. Daniel sat on the couch, beer in hand, playing a video game with the volume turned up so loud it rattled the windows. Did you call about the rent extension? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I dropped my bag on the counter. He didn't even glance at me. I'll do it tomorrow. You said that yesterday, I snapped, my frustration boiling over. Do you even care that we're behind on bills, or that I've been working late every night trying to keep us afloat? Finally, he paused his game and turned to face me, his expression bored and annoyed. Maybe if you weren't always nagging me, I'd feel more motivated. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Nagging you? I repeated, my voice trembling. I'm holding this entire relationship together, Daniel. I'm the one working, cleaning, paying the bills. What exactly are you doing besides making excuses? He rolled his eyes and leaned back on the couch. Here we go again. You knew who I was when you moved in. If you don't like it, maybe you should leave. The casual cruelty of his words stunned me. My chest tightened, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You're right, I said after a long pause, my voice low but firm. I should leave. He looked at me, surprised, as if he hadn't expected me to agree. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done, I replied, my voice growing stronger. I can't do this anymore. I won't. I deserve better than this, than you. For a moment, he just stared at me, and I thought maybe he'd fight for us. But instead, he shrugged. Fine, do whatever you want. His indifference was the final nail in the coffin. Without another word, I turned and walked to the bedroom, grabbing a suitcase and throwing my clothes inside. My hands trembled, but with every item I packed, I felt a growing sense of clarity. By the time I zipped up the bag and carried it out to the car, I felt lighter than I had in months. As I drove away, the weight of regret and disappointment began to lift, replaced by a fragile but unmistakable sense of hope. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I would never settle for less than I deserved again. Breaking up with Daniel was both painful and liberating. For the first time in years, I was completely alone. My new apartment was small and quiet, but it became a sanctuary. I spent my evenings journaling, pouring my thoughts onto the page in an effort to understand myself. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects and earning recognition for my creativity and leadership. The company I worked for, a growing marketing firm, had always been a source of pride for me, even when my personal life was falling apart. With Daniel gone, I channeled my energy into crafting campaigns that made waves in the industry. I pitched bold ideas, worked late nights, and took risks that paid off. Slowly, I began to see myself as more than the woman who had made mistakes. I was a creator, a leader, someone who could stand on her own 2 feet. One of my proudest moments came during a high-stakes pitch to a national client. I had spent weeks perfecting the concept, blending creativity with strategic insight. As I stood in front of a room full of executives, presenting my vision with confidence, I felt a flicker of the person I used to be. When the client's applause filled the room, I knew I had made the right choice by focusing on myself. But the nights were still hard. I would lie awake thinking about Eric, wondering if he had moved on, if he had found someone who appreciated him in all the ways I hadn't. Those moments of doubt were a reminder that healing wasn't a straight line. I carried the weight of my choices with me, but instead of letting it crush me, I used it to fuel my growth. I also began to reconnect with the people I had neglected during my time with Daniel. My best friend Lena had always been there for me, even when I pulled away. Over coffee one Saturday morning, I finally opened up to her about everything: the affair, the breakup, the loneliness. I was so selfish, I admitted, staring down at my cappuccino. I hurt Eric, I hurt myself, and for what? A relationship that fell apart as soon as it started. Lena reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Cassie, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that you're owning them and trying to be better. That takes courage. Her words stayed with me, a beacon of hope on the darker days. I started attending yoga classes and therapy sessions, where I learned to confront the parts of myself I had been running from for years. It wasn't easy, but with each step I felt a little closer to the person I wanted to be. By the time I received an invitation to an alumni networking event, I felt ready to face the past. It wasn't about seeking redemption or rekindling anything with Eric. It was about standing in the same room as my mistakes, and knowing they no longer define me. Months later, I received an invitation to an alumni networking event. I almost didn't go, afraid of running into Eric, but something pushed me to RSVP. The night of the event, I spotted him almost immediately. He stood near the bar, laughing with a small group of people. He looked different, confident, radiant, happy. And beside him was a stunning woman with a warm smile. Our eyes met briefly, and he approached me with a polite smile. Cassandra, he said, his tone warm but distant. It's been a while. It has, I replied, my throat tightening. You look good. So do you, he said, though his eyes held no lingering affection. We spoke briefly, exchanging pleasantries before he excused himself to rejoin his group. As I watched him walk away, hand in hand with his girlfriend, a pang of regret settled in my chest. But it was different this time. Softer. For the first time, I felt at peace with my choices. My journey hadn't been about finding the right partner or rekindling a lost love. It had been about finding myself. And as I stepped into the cool night air, I realized that was enough.